Hello, everybody, and welcome into episode 10 of the Emmitt Sevores Show. No actual football to talk about for the first time. This is definitely a little bit interesting. All we have is a bunch of off-season stuff. We're going to talk about all the coaching hires that have happened so far. We'll talk about a little bit of quarterback talk with Aaron Rodgers, Derek Carr, and we might be able to touch on the Titans. I'm joined alongside me is Steezy A. Smith. Steezy, how you doing?
Man, I'm feeling great, feeling blessed. Always a pleasure being on, Emmett. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, of course. Let's start it in Carolina. They hired former Colts head coach Frank Reich. It was the first hire of the cycle. It kind of, I don't want to say came out of nowhere, but I don't know if Frank Reich was necessarily expected to get a job in this hiring cycle. I think a lot of people thought he was going to, do what a lot of people have done. Mike McCarthy did it, just taking that year off. It seems like Cliff Kingsbury is going to be doing that. I think that's where everyone kind of thought it was leaning, but then the Panthers kind of come out of nowhere and hire Frank Reich. What do you think of the hire?
I like it. A lot of people, I think, were kind of flaming Carolina, and they said that Steve Wilks deserved a chance, and he most definitely did. But the thing is, Steve Wilks is a defensive-minded coach, and nothing against defensive-minded coaches, but when was the last time a defensive-minded coach led his team to a Super Bowl?
Yeah,
I think Pete Carroll. Honestly, I
probably.
mean, here in Seattle, right? And so I'm not saying you can't win with the defensive-minded head coach, but I think with Carolina and how they've kind of mapped out their blueprint to hopefully gaining more success, they probably figured out, offense is the way to go. An offensive-minded guy is the way to go. Quarterback guru type of guy is the way to go. And like you said, Frank Reich, you weren't so sure about his cachet and whatnot, but before that whole disaster in Indianapolis with the plethora of quarterbacks, that carousel of quarterbacks that they were kind of going into all these seasons with, Frank Reich was known as that quarterback whisperer. He was known as that offensive mastermind. He was known as that guy that could work with quarterbacks. The problem was Indianapolis never had any stability at the game's most important position, and so I think a lot of things that he kind of did over there were kind of overlooked. I understand they got out to a very rocky start because he got fired. What was in the middle of this season, correct? Right. And so, I can't put the blame entirely on him. I mean, obviously, yeah, some of it has to fall on him, because he is the head coach. But overall, I think Carolina made I think a great move, and I think that kind of signals to me that they're looking to take, a young quarterback. If they need to trade up into the top five to get their guy, then so be it. But I think Frank Reich, like I said, he's known as an offensive guru. He's known as an offensive mastermind. He's known for working alongside quarterbacks, and Carolina wants to build a competent roster around a quarterback that they can hopefully grab in the top 10 in this year's draft. So overall, I like the move. If I had to give it a grade, I'd say right now I'd give it a B.
Yeah, I think if you go back to around, in about 2010, the only coaches to win Super Bowls as defensive-minded head coaches is Bill Belichick, Pete Carroll, and then I believe John Fox in there as well.
Right. There you go.
But I mean, and Tom Coughlin in there in 2011, but for the most part, it doesn't happen. You're either talking about Pete Carroll, who's probably a borderline Hall of Fame head coach. Tom Coughlin was in that discussion as well. And then the best coach of all time in Bill Belichick. It's just not something that happens, right? You take a look, and even like some of the better defensive head, like we looked at Dan Quinn. They obviously blew that lead to Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. But a lot of these games come down to offense. So I understand with them wanting to go with an offensive head coach. It's one of my favorite hires in this cycle, I think, because he immediately comes in and he's the best head coach in the division, like easily.
Yeah.
Right. Todd Bowles is not, I think he proved himself not to be incompetent last year, but he had a lot of mistakes. He was bailed out a lot. There was a couple games down the stretch last year. It happened in the Rams game. It happened in the Saints game. And it worked out for them both times, but it's like where they're punting in these positions where it's like, you should not be punting here. Like, it's one of those, it's like, it's a obvious go for it situation. They punt and it winds up working out, but just because it works out doesn't mean it was the right decision. Then obviously you go, and Dennis Allen has been kind of a dumpster fire wherever he's been a head coach at. And then obviously I think the jury's still out on Smith for the Falcons. So I really like the Frank Reich hire, and I think that a lot of the stuff that the Panthers are going to do, we'll talk about Derek Carr in a little bit. I think they need to go. If you're going to have Frank Reich, I think you need to go fresh at quarterback. Start off fresh with a young guy. I think he's tried out the veteran. He's tried out the Carson Wentz. He's tried out the Phillip Rivers. I think what's best for him is probably let's just go young, whether that's C.J. Stroud or probably aren't going to trade up to get Bryce Young at one, but I think they have to go young in order for this hire to make true sense, because otherwise it kind of feels like he'd be doing the same thing that he was doing in Indy. And of course, I'm sure that's something that was discussed in the interview process. So I think they probably know where they're going to go at quarterback already. I think probably the most obvious head coaching hire was D'Amico Ryans going to the Texans. Everyone kind of had that one, not written in Sharpie, but at least written in pen. I mean, it was pretty much set in stone that he was going to go to Houston. It's probably, again, I there's not a whole lot of coaching hires throughout this cycle that I really dislike. D'Amico Ryans, I think he is one of those guys where I think it makes sense to bring in a defensive guy. Like I think him,
Yeah.
Robert Saleh is another one of those like guys who I think that they're not just a defensive head coach. I think they can also be a culture guy. Like I think you can't just bring in like a defensive guru and expect your team to go that way. Like Brandon Staley, for example, like we thought he was a defensive guru, but he's for sure not a culture guy, because that team looks exactly how they've looked for pretty much my entire lifetime, with losing in impossible fashion. So I think the Texans hire here with D'Amico Ryans is very fantastic. I think he also went to not necessarily the best situation, but I mean they have the number 2 overall pick. They can kind of do whatever they want. I don't think that Chicago is going to take a quarterback number 1 overall, and I don't know what someone's going to have to give up for that number 1 overall pick. So I think that they are in position to wind up getting Bryce Young, or whoever they do wind up liking at quarterback. But I really like the hire. I think maybe it's not going to look super great this year, because I don't think that roster is uber talented. But I think that as time goes on and they give him more time and they put more talent on that roster, I think he's going to be able to get the most out of them.
Yeah, I think I might have been a year too early. And I tweeted this out when when news of the hire became official. But I said that don't be surprised if Houston is in the running for the AFC South next year. And then that says more about the state of the AFC South than it does about how strong the roster will be come the offseason. Obviously, a lot of things have to happen, like you talked about. They have the number 2 overall pick. They also have another top, what is it, 12 pick, because they have the first round pick courtesy of Cleveland. And so you have a lot to work with. You have a lot of cap space. And we've seen major turnarounds happen in just one offseason. If a team is willing to not push all the chips, to the middle per se, but if they're willing to cash in on a lot of those chips that they have and spending some of that money, you bring in a franchise quarterback now. Okay, why not, give him some support now, in free agency and in the draft, getting some weapons and whatnot. I think Houston, like you said, and I know we kind of just talked down on defensive-minded head coaches, but I think he brought it up perfectly. I mean, he's a guy that's also going to be a culture setter, a tone setter. I think he has that feistiness. I think that cachet is already there. I mean, he's a former player. He wasn't just a scrub. He wasn't just another guy in the NFL. He used to be a star linebacker. I remember playing Madden back in the day, and anytime I'd create or work with a team on franchise mode, D'Amico Ryans was always a linebacker that I wanted on my team. He was just that good as a linebacker. And so now as a head coach, we've seen him prove his worth, with the San Francisco 49ers. We've seen what he can do. And so I love this hire. I mean, I just think that he has this magnetic pull. He's going to be a very player-friendly type of coach, and I think a lot of the guys are going to be able to, kind of rally around him. He's going to be able to rally troops, galvanize the troops, and I think he's the perfect hire. Again, he also used to play for the Texans, and so there is familiarity there. And I think Houston, I mean, they had the potential to make a huge turnaround. I could see them winning 6 or 7 games, maybe 8 games, in their first season with D'Amico Ryans. And like you said, I think he is one of those guys, one of those defensive-minded guys that could potentially lead this team to, I don't know, a Super Bowl down the road. He's just that sort of guy. There's just something about him. And I think he can eventually, and I know this is a lot to expect, but he can be like a Pete Carroll. He can be like a Tom Coughlin. He can be like a Robert Saleh. I see all the world potential in him, and I absolutely love this hire for the Texans. I think they hired the best head coaching candidate out there, and I think it'll pay off as soon as next season.
Yeah, I could see that happening as well. Let's keep it in the AFC South. The Colts, directly after the Super Bowl, got Eagles offensive coordinator Shane Steichen. Obviously, he's been leading a high-powered offense for the past year and a half. He took over play calling duties in the middle of last season, got them all the way to the Super Bowl. They put up 35 points in the Super Bowl against the Chiefs. They just fell a little bit short. This is another hire that I really do like. I think that with the Colts, very similar to the Panthers, I think they just have to go young. And I think that that's probably what they're leaning towards doing. The only downside of this hire, I think, is that we're going to have to see how he does with a non-mobile quarterback. Like, I think the Colts are one of those teams. Like, I don't think they're going to be able, or, you know, be willing to trade up to number one to get to wind up getting Bryce Young, who's a more mobile guy, but he's, you know, still not incredibly mobile. Maybe they, you know, are waiting for Anthony Richardson to fall and try to get a very mobile guy. But I think that's what would fit Shane Steichen's offense best. Again, granted, he could very well be a fantastic play caller with him in the pocket, as we saw kind of, you know, in the Super Bowl. Like Jalen Hurts, a lot of his stuff, he was very good in the pocket. He was very good within the pocket throughout the season. It wasn't like it wasn't like a Lamar Jackson type of season where it was just a lot of like running and wild plays. Jalen Hurts was good from inside the pocket. So I guess we'll have to wait and see on that. But again, it is it's another hire that I like within this head coaching cycle. I think that it causes a lot of problems for the Eagles. We'll talk about Jonathan Gannon in just a little bit, but I really like the hire for the Colts. And again, he's now coming into a division. The only, you know, another one of the tough things is that now that division seems stacked with head coaches, right? Obviously, Doug Peterson, Mike Vrabel. Now you're talking about DeMeco Ryans and Shane Steichen. I think it's going to be an absolute bloodbath in that division.
Right, and just real quick, Mike Vrabel is another defensive-minded guy that we forgot to
Yep.
mention, but he's also a culture setter, a tone setter, a former player. So DeMeco Ryans kind of fits along that same mold. But going back to this, Shane Steichen, I absolutely love the hire as well. You know, and I know you can only say that so much about all these teams hiring, you know, coaches. But look, on all honesty, I really like this move. Whenever a first-time head coach, you know, comes into the fold, I like to look at, you know, their history, but not, you know, in the roles that they've, you know, had, but in some of the guys and the quarterbacks that they've had a chance to work with. And so Shane Steichen, he also had, I think it was a year or two. No, he had a couple years with the Chargers, and so he's worked with Phillip Rivers. He's also worked with Justin Herbert. I think he was there for Justin Herbert's rookie season, and so not only does he have experience playing or coaching or you know, curating offenses for, you know, the Eagles and Jalen Hurts, but he's also worked with Justin Herbert. He's also worked with Phillip Rivers, and so there's a great history there of working alongside, you know, bigger, taller, strong armed quarterbacks. And so I think when I look at this move, the Colts are probably looking at an Anthony Richardson or a Will Levis. I mean, those two kind of fit the mold of the guys that Shane Steichen has been around. Now, if he's willing to break that mold and take a CJ Stroud or a Bryce Young, then more power to him, right? I'd love to see him excel in that. But he's also another guy that's been heralded as an offensive guru, as another offensive mastermind, as another guy that, you know, that could work with quarterbacks. And so I think with the Colts, I mean, I'm 100% with you, Emmitt. I think, you know, their only option here is to really go young at quarterback. I mean, you've had, what, the last 6, 7, maybe 8 years since Andrew Luck retired, you've had a revolving door, just a carousel of quarterbacks, and it's just been an absolute disaster. Nothing has worked out, and I'm pretty sure Jim Irsay has gotten completely tired of that. And so unless the Derek Carr comes calling along for the cheap, possibly, and they're not as enamored with these quarterbacks that we all would like to think that they are, you know, at the top of the draft, and maybe that's the only way I see them going to veteran. But for the most part, I do like the hire. Like I mentioned, he's an offensive guy. He's a young guy. He's worked with other quarterbacks in the league, and I think the Colts got a good one here.
Yeah, again, it seems I feel really bad for the one hire in this entire cycle that I don't like, and we'll save him for last. But Sean Payton, it was probably the biggest name on the market. Obviously, DeMeco Ryans is the best, or is thought to be the best first-year head coach. But Sean Payton, he's a made man. He has a Super Bowl win under his belt. Obviously, he was spent all that time in New Orleans. It just kind of fell apart towards the end. Lost a lot of cap mobility. Lost Drew Brees. You know, had Jameis Winston got injured. And now he's kind of being thrown in here to he's going to have to go and basically fix Russell Wilson if he is fixable. I think he is fixable, but that's going to be his job. I really do like the hire. Again, it feels dumb to keep saying that over and over again. I really do like the hire. The only problem that I see is that I think that this team is a little bit, I don't want to say talent deficient, but they're not as talented as I think a lot of people thought they were last year. Like, obviously, they still have the guys like Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, obviously Russell Wilson at quarterback. I'm blanking on their running back's name, completely blanking. Javonte Williams. Then they have Pat Surtain on the back end, and some other good defensive players. But like, they lost a guy like a Bradley Chubb. They no longer have Noah Fant. Like, they lost a lot of these players. No Shelby Harris, obviously he's playing for the Seahawks as well. I think that the team, it's going to be very, interesting to see how they play this year, and being in the division that they're in. Obviously, the Raiders are a huge question mark. The Chargers can be a huge question mark, but I think we all believe that they're going to be better than they were this past year. Obviously, with adding a guy like Kellen Moore, and then the Chiefs are the Super Bowl champions. I think that he's being put into a situation where he's going to, he's going to come in, and he's not the best coach in his division. He's not, I don't want to say, or he's the second best coach in his division, but like, where does his quarterback rank? Obviously, again, we don't know who's going to be the Raiders starting quarterback, but I mean, let's say Aaron Rodgers goes to the Raiders. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Now you're stuck with what we would say, I think, probably the fourth best quarterback in the division. And I think that's a tough thing to overcome for him. I always like acquiring Sean Payton. Obviously, giving up a first and a second round pick hurts, but I think it's 100% worth it, because I think for the most part, I think he's going to be there for, unless stuff goes horribly wrong, he'll probably be there for about 10 years. And I think that in the long run, I think it probably winds up working out for you. He's way more of an offensive guru than he is a culture guy. But I think that might be what they've been looking for. When was the last time they had a true offensive head coach? It hasn't been, anytime super recently for me. So maybe they just need to go in that opposite direction. Bring in, the quarterback whisperer is what they're calling Sean Payton. Maybe they're able to fix Russell Wilson. Maybe they're not. But I think ultimately, even if Russell Wilson doesn't work out and we're looking at this hire in 2 years, I think we're all still looking at it like it was probably more on Russ than it was on Sean Payton. I think it's very high risk for the Broncos, but very low risk for Sean Payton.
100%. I mean, and I could be wrong about this, but if I'm not mistaken, the last time they had an offensive-minded head coach was Josh McDaniels. And let's hope that it doesn't end up working out in the way that it worked out for Josh McDaniels and the Broncos. And that was when they had Tim Tebow, right? But I think with a Sean Payton, look, a first and a second round pick is never ideal, especially like you're getting a head coach and you're having to trade, premium draft capital times 2 to get a head coach. And I know I understand he's a made man, he's won a Super Bowl and whatnot. That's never an ideal price to pay. But on the same token, you've invested so much into Russell Wilson. You're kind of stuck with Russell Wilson. Even if you want to, you can't really release or trade him for the next year or two without any sort of major cap ramifications. And so if you're stuck with a guy like a Russell Wilson and you've invested that much, you might as well invest in even more to try to fix your broken investment. And the only real solution that a lot of people are kind of jumping to the conclusion of is that he's the only guy that could potentially fix Russell Wilson. If not him, then who else? What else? Right? And so that's the only reason why, if I'm the Denver Broncos, I'm okay with forking over so much to acquire a head coach. It's unprecedented, right? You don't see teams trading premium capital times 2 for a head coach, no matter how made that man is. And so the only reason why it works out once again is because the Denver Broncos have a broken investment and they need to, kind of recapture the magic, right, per se, or kind of, see if they could bring them back, right? And Sean Payton really is the only guy that could do that. Again, if not him, then who else? There is still some talent to work with, like you alluded to. I think defensively, I mean, they had one of the top defenses in football last year and the year before that. And I know they don't have as much capital or even cap space, but again, a lot of these win now teams, they sometimes like to make moves out of nowhere or really just come out of their butts. And we're like, whoa, how do they do that? And I think the Denver Broncos are definitely going to be in win now mode, especially after acquiring a guy like Sean Payton. Russell Wilson has already vowed to change his offseason program. He's vowed to, I guess, work even harder than ever. And so we'll see where that goes. But again, I know we sound like a broken record, but this is another, I think, fantastic head coaching hire, and hopefully it pays off as soon as next season.
Yeah. Speaking on their defense just a little bit, I think one of the things that worries me is obviously losing a defensive head coach. We saw, obviously, they lost Nat Hackett this year, but losing, Vic Fangio from the previous year. And then even at the beginning of the season, you had, the defensive talent, right? You had Randy Gregory was playing at the beginning of the season. You had Bradley Chubb on your roster at the beginning of the season. Now we're what? We're about to be 2 years removed, or 2 seasons removed from Vic Fangio being there. So now you're probably bringing in a different defensive scheme. Now you're kind of bleeding the talent out a little bit. I think that, and especially with Sean Payton teams, for a while there, up until he got Dennis Allen as the defensive coordinator, and I think around 2020, like that was always the big issue for the Saints, was the defensive end of the ball. What I think they went like 3 straight years with going 7-9 and missing the playoffs, and they had like a top 5 offense each year, but they had like a bottom 5 defense. So it just worries me that maybe that's going to happen. Obviously, again, the division scares me a lot for them. But Sean Payton, any team outside of probably the Chiefs and the Patriots, I think would look at Sean Payton as an upgrade over their current head coach. I think he's up there in top 5 at bare minimum. Then the last head coach. We don't even have to answer the least favorite. I'm assuming this probably we're both going to say that Jonathan Gannon's the least favorite. He's mine, at least. I think it's just in this day and age, I don't understand hiring a defensive head coach unless he is just groundbreaking. Like what this defensive coordinator hire or the head coaching hire of Jonathan Gannon feels like. It feels very similar to what we saw with Brandon Staley. It feels very similar to that, where you're looking at the defense that he was coordinating, and it is just talent rich, absolutely talent rich. And then you look at the team he's moving to, and on the defensive side of the ball, like they don't have a whole lot of talent, right? We saw they didn't have Chandler Jones last year because he signed with the Raiders. They have Budda Baker, but Budda Baker was, I don't want to say nowhere to be seen last year, but I didn't see a whole lot of flash plays from him. Byron Murphy hasn't looked particularly great. Zaven Collins was very inconsistent. Isaiah Simmons, very inconsistent. Like JJ Watt now retired. Like they just don't have a whole lot of anything. And that's just on the defensive side of the ball. Now you move towards the offense, and we're in the same position. We talked about it a little bit earlier. What best case scenario? What their offense, they turn it around and then they go number 1, and then they're searching for a new offensive coordinator the next season, right? Because that's how it works. That's generally why you have to hire a defensive guy like DeMeco Ryans and Robert Saleh and Mike Vrabel. These are like outlier guys, and they're also guys who are playing a very, like, their team revolves around that, like the defensive side of the ball, where it's like, we're going to play good defense so that on offense, we're going to run the ball to make sure that our defense is very well rested. But I think with the Cardinals being in the division that they're in, I don't know. And especially with having Kyler Murray at court, like a superstar quarterback, like, right, we talk about Vrabel. It's like Vrabel's had Ryan Tannehill. Okay, it makes sense why you'd want to run the ball. Robert Saleh, he had Zach Wilson. It makes sense why you'd want to run the ball. But now you have Kyler Murray. And unless you're going to be using him in the running game, he's already an injury risk. The hire on a lot of different levels doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. He must have interviewed very well. And I think obviously they offered the job to Brian Flores, is the report, and he declined. Yeah. So it seems like they were looking to go defensive all the way. But even if you got the Brian Flores hire, I would have liked that a lot more, because Flores can be seen as a culture guy. Obviously, there was all the reports with how he was with Tua and all this stuff. But I think like a guy like that is what Kyler Murray would need. We're seeing Kyler Murray. Was it last offseason that we had the study clause in his contract? Then he wasn't happy that it was in his contract, so then it got removed from his contract. And we're hearing him. He's getting into it on the sidelines with Cliff Kingsbury. It just feels like that would have been a lot better hire. Granted, you offered the job to him. He said no. What can you do? But it feels like Jonathan. I don't know how long Jonathan Gannon's going to last in this job.
Yeah, look, to the Arizona Cardinals. Respectfully, what are you guys doing? Yeah. Okay, Brian Flores turned down the job, but what about an Eric Bieniemy? And even if you had concerns about, okay, he's probably handled interviews the wrong way, or he's being carried by Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, and the franchise that is the Kansas City Chiefs, but at least he's an offensive-minded guy. At least he's worked with superstars before. At least he has a resume. At least he would, cater to what the best player on their team does, or at least the position that he plays in on the side of the ball that he plays in. And so, look, with Jonathan Gannon, it almost feels like they settled, on a guy that just because his team was in the Super Bowl, it's like, we got to get this guy on our team. He has to be the head coach. But it's like, what did he do in the Super Bowl? His defense gave up 38 points, right? And all the questions leading up to the Super Bowl, at least one of the main questions on Philadelphia's side of things was, is this defense legit? How is this defense going to not stop? Because you can't stop Patrick Mahomes in that Chiefs offense, but how are they going to contain Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid in that Chiefs offense? Well, they showed us 38 points, and that's how he handled that situation with, like you said, a talent-rich defense. Most of which those guys are free agents. Actually, James Bradbury is a free agent, Fletcher Cox is a free agent, Javon Hargrave is a free agent, Brandon Graham is a free agent, and Ndamukong Suh is a free agent, Linval Joseph is a free agent, and that's not even including the offensive side of the football. But Jonathan Gannon, what did he do in his 1 year as a defensive coordinator for the Eagles, okay, they had 70 sacks and whatnot, but can't we attribute most of that to the talent, to the players on the team? And given the fact that he only has that 1 year, I mean, what does he have resume wise? Who are some of the other players that he's worked with? Because earlier I talked about Shane Steichen and some of the things that I liked about him. Well, I liked his history. I like some of the guys that he's worked with. Jonathan Gannon, what history is there for him to fall back on? What kind of other players outside of this season, is there for him to fall back on? How did he perform in the game's, biggest stage? And then you have you have a team that's built around, like you said, a mega talented quarterback in a Kyler Murray. Could it be that nobody wants to coach Kyler Murray? And so Jonathan Gannon was like, yo, I might never get another opportunity to be a head coach in the National Football League again. F it, I'm going to take it. I mean, they gave him 5 years for crying out loud. 5 years for doing what? What has he done? Again, I say this respectfully because, like you said, he probably interviewed well. He probably, is probably know more inside the league than we probably would know. But again, I think, his resume kind of speaks for itself. And in this scenario, it doesn't do him any favors. I mean, who have you worked with? What have you done? And I don't know. I think this is just, like you said, this is going to be a disaster. I don't even know if he's going to be as good as a Brandon Staley. At least Brandon Staley took his team to the playoffs this past season. The Cardinals, I don't see that happening anytime soon. And they're going to blow it up on offense as well. I'm not sure if James Conner's coming back. DeAndre Hopkins wants to be traded. Heck, does Kyler Murray want to continue playing football for the next 3 or 4 years? How do we know that he's not going to want to pivot towards baseball when things get hard? And Jonathan Gannon does not seem like that guy to me, and I would love nothing more than for him to prove me wrong. Please do so. Prove me wrong. But right now, I'd have to agree with you, Emmitt. This is the worst head coaching hire by a mile. And if Eric Bieniemy does damage over there in Washington with one of the worst and most putrid offenses in the last 2 or 3 years, then oh my gosh, are they going to look stupid. But yo, I hope he doesn't blow this, because with all due respect, this is a horrible hire. But again, I hope he does well.
Yeah, I think one of the things that the Cardinals kind of, the way they've screwed themselves a little bit here, like let's say we're going to talk about Eric Bieniemy in just a little bit, but let's say they have an explosive offense in Washington, right? I think that the way they've put themselves in the position here, obviously to no real fault of their own with Kyler Murray's injury, and he's probably not going to be ready to go until midway through the season. And then you kind of have already given Jonathan Gannon like a mulligan, right? Like it almost feels like it would be stupid to not give him 2 years, right? Like, like let's say they start off 1-7 because they don't have a quarterback. They have, Kyler Murray's injured. And then the second half of the season with Kyler Murray, they kind of go like 5, like that's not, you can't fire a guy. You definitely can. And I would, if Eric Bieniemy was up for it. But they've put themselves in a tough position where it's like, it almost feels like you'd be doing him a major disservice to fire him after having, no Kyler Murray for probably 8 or 9 games. Yeah, but it's my least favorite hire of the entire cycle. We'll go through this one quick. Who was your favorite hire, real quick?
Man, I gotta go with D'Amico Ryans. Like I said earlier, I mean, he kind of just, there's something about him. There's like this aura about him, and I could see him, becoming like a Mike Vrabel, like a Robert Saleh, like a Pete Carroll, a guy that fits that mold.
Yeah, for me, I think shockingly, mine is Frank Reich. I really like the hire of Frank Reich. I think it feels very, obviously he didn't get as this successful, but it feels like a Doug Peterson sort of hire where we're going to we kind of look at it from the outside and we're like, really? Is that what we're doing? And then I think if they get a quarterback in there, we're going to be like, oh, that's right. This guy could coach that. Like, you know what I mean? Like where we look at Frank Reich, and again, the quarterback situation he's had to deal with over the past couple of years have sucked. Matt Ryan, right? Matt Ryan, Carson Wentz, a really bad version of Phillip Rivers, who he still brought to the playoffs, by the way. And then you look at, the controversy that Doug Peterson was dealing with his last year in Philadelphia, right? It was the Carson Wentz, but they drafted Jalen Hurts. And then, we were in the final game of the season, I think. And it's like they benched Jalen Hurts for Nate Sudfeld. And, it was just a gigantic mess. But I think a change of location to a better situation, I think is probably going to wind up helping both Frank Reich out. It obviously already helped out Doug Peterson. We talked about Eric Bieniemy a little bit. I think for Eric Bieniemy personally, I think that this, if his true goal is to get a head coaching job, then this move makes sense.
Yeah.
But I think that it, with taking everything putting everything in perspective, I think it's not a great move by him. I think that Washington offensively is one of the most talent deficient rosters in the league. Like quarterback wise, is Sam Howell, is he their guy? Is Taylor Heineke their guy? If the answer is yes to that, you're probably not in a great situation. Then you look Brian Robinson at running back, kind of an asterisk on his first season. Obviously, he was dealing with the gunshot wounds and healing from that. Terry McLaurin obviously is a fantastic wide receiver, but outside of, they're not super talented on that offensive side of the ball. Again, obviously, if Eric Bieniemy is able to make magic with this, then I think that he'll be probably getting a head coaching job this next hiring cycle. But I think that if it's bad, I think, especially with how we've seen, for the most part, like black head coaches or minority head coaches they don't get the benefit of the doubt. Like if it goes horribly for him, they're not going to be, well, the talent was bad. They're going to, well, Eric Bieniemy just can't coach. Like he just can't coach. It's just not for him. And I don't think that that's fair, but I think that's how a lot of people are going to look at it if it winds up going sideways. I don't want to say that I think it's going to, because I do believe in Eric Bieniemy, but I think like on offense, they just don't have a lot. Like Jahan Dotson, they drafted in the first round last year, but I didn't see a whole lot of splash from him. Granted, I wasn't watching a whole lot of Commander games, but I didn't see a whole lot of splash from him. I think that it seems like he really wants to be a head coach in this league. And again, like let's say it doesn't work out this year. I'm sure Andy Reid's going to welcome him back with open arms. But he's putting it all on the line, and I feel like maybe there was a better place he could have gone, maybe not. But betting on the Commanders kind of seems like a very odd strategy.
See, and that's very valid because, like I talked about earlier, that Washington offense has been putrid. And I'm a little higher on their talent offensively than I guess you are, because I actually really like Jahan Dotson. I have him in a couple of dynasty leagues, and usually when I bring up guys that I have in fantasy, it also means that I'm watching their games, and so I'm watching more Jahan Dotson. He did miss, what was it, 7 to 8 games about the middle of the season. So he played like the first 3, and then he came back to play like the last 4 or 5. But he had 7 touchdowns in less than 10 games played, and so he's a speed demon. He's a threat in the red zone. They took him in the first round for a reason, and I thought he displayed a lot of potential last year. And I think he could be a bona fide number 2 alongside of Terry McLaurin. Eric Bieniemy's probably seeing the same thing that I'm seeing. So I think with the Bieniemy, look, what else was he going to do in Kansas City, to garner a head coaching job? Like, what more was there for him to do? He's already appeared in 5 straight AFC Championship games, 2 Super Bowls. His offense has finished no worse than 6th in the last 5 to 6 years. And so it's like, what else is there for me to do to get a head coaching job? And so I think the way that he's looking at it was like, yo, let me help revive an offense that's finished near the bottom of the league for the last 3 years. They have some playmakers for me to work with. There's some potential. They might take a quarterback, if they're not happy with the Sam Howell. Taylor Heineke is a free agent. Carson Wentz is already trending towards a breakup as per reports. And so I think with the Eric Bieniemy, if he was going to bet on himself, then bet on yourself in a bad situation, because if you really truly believe in yourself, then you're going to excel no matter the situation. Even if they don't finish as a, let's say, top of the league or top half of the league as far as offensive rankings, if they show more competency, if they could show, just more flashes, if they can show, a few games in where they score just a plethora of points and where they're keeping up with an opponent that they shouldn't be keeping up with, and I think Eric Bieniemy is going to garner plenty more head coaching consideration going into the next offseason. But again, I'm just so puzzled because why didn't Arizona offer the job? I mean, you've seen what he can do, right? Even if there's a belief that, he's kind of been carried by Pat Mahomes and Andy Reid and whatnot, there is still a history there, and there is still some talent to work with, especially at quarterback. And so I think, again, if I'm Eric Bieniemy, if I was going to bet on myself, then this is the perfect situation, because this is a team that's flying under the radar. This is a team that nobody cares about. This is a team that has performed, below expectations, at least offensively, the last couple of years. And so if he's going to increase that stock of his, which is already high, which already should, have resulted in a head coaching job, he shouldn't have to fight for this like this. But if he was going to, I think Washington's actually a great landing spot for him.
We will agree to disagree on that one. I think it's just with Washington, and maybe a lot of it is because of quarterback play. I think that's going to be a huge, again, if they decide they're going to rock out with Sam Howell and Sam Howell just isn't good, right? Like you couldn't drop, you couldn't drop Zach Wilson into Kansas City's offense and it's not going to look the same. Like, because the quarterback play, like at some point you just can't overcome quarterback play. And I think that's probably what's been happening with the Commanders a lot over the past however many years. And so I think with Bieniemy, he might be doomed with none of his own on this one. I think that the Commanders, the quarterback is the most important position, and it seems like they don't know really what they're doing. I like it. It feels it feels a little weird. Speaking of a team who I don't really know what they're doing with their quarterback position, the Raiders, they cut Derek Carr. He's met with the Saints. He's met with the Jets. The Panthers have been mentioned as a team who they want or who wants him. The best landing spot for Derek Carr to me is the Jets. I think, although I don't think that Derek Carr he's not gonna change life for the Jets. I think he could probably get them to the playoffs. I think the narrative on Derek Carr has kind of, I don't know, after this season, like I think it somehow, like everybody was super high on Derek Carr. Then we watched him during the season, and then during the offseason, it's kind of like gone all the way back up. Like I think I have him ranked as the 15th best quarterback in football. Like I think that there's probably just listing them off: Mahomes, Burrow, Allen, Lawrence, Herbert, Deshaun, Lamar, and I think Tua. We've seen the high side of Tua. And then in the NFC, like Jalen Hurts, Dak, Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford, and Kyler. Like I think Kirk Cousins and Derek Carr are kind of in that same mid-tier category where it's like I think the Raiders are doing something a little bit brave with like moving off. You know, it's like everybody's scared to move off of that guy because like, you know, it's going to be very hard, or you're going to really have to pay a lot to get somebody better. And I think it's you know, it's going to be you don't really, obviously you don't want to get anybody worse, but I think with the Jets, I don't know if he doesn't launch him into like Super Bowl contender category for me. But I think the Jets is a spot where he's going to be asked to not do the least, but I think he's going to be able to do a little bit more of what we saw him be successful in Las Vegas, where it's more of not trusting trusting the scheme, I guess, is a little bit more of what he was asked to do his first however long there, where it's, you know, hitting the open guy and playing within the scheme more, whereas like, you know, we saw this past year with like Devontae Adams, like a lot of what Devontae Adams was great with a guy like Aaron Rodgers was not in the scheme. It was like Rodgers saw something pre-snap. It was supposed to be a run play. He said that, nope, I'm just going to throw it to Devontae really quick. And there was a lot of that like off script sort of stuff where it's like, you're not really, the scheme tells you to throw it one way, but Devontae Adams is in one-on-one coverage. So what are you going to do? And it felt like Derek Carr, you know, didn't feel super comfortable going outside of the scheme. And so I think going into the Jets, where I think Robert Saleh is going to want to try to keep it within the scheme. And Nathaniel Hackett, do I think he's going to be a great offensive coordinator? No, probably not. But I think he'll be able to design an offense where they're keeping it within the scheme. And I think he'll be a lot more successful there than he was this past year in Vegas.
Real quick, who do you think is better now, Geno Smith or Derek Carr?
Ooh. I'm going to go, I'll go with Derek Carr just because I think I would need to see it from another season for Geno. I think like at least Derek Carr, although I'm still not super high on Derek Carr, I think that we've seen him be that like in that, you know, 10 to 15 range for most of his career. Like he's never been great, but he's never been like bad. Whereas like with Geno Smith, this was the first season he's been, you know, in that like top 10 category. So if I see it another year from Geno, if he repeats this year and, you know, maybe a couple more touchdowns, few less picks, then I would have no problem putting Geno over Derek. But for now, Derek over Geno.
Okay, and then real quick, I'm gonna rephrase that. How about going into next year to give your chance the best shot at winning? Which of those two quarterbacks would give you the best chance of winning, Geno Smith or Derek Carr? So history be damned.
And we're just assuming that they're on the same roster.
Mm-hmm. Same everything.
It's very tough, and I think it's close. I don't think there's a wrong answer, but I think probably Geno. I think what I saw him do off script last year, and kind of doing that more of, and granted, it can, you know, if he throws more picks or DK drops some passes or Tyler Lockett drops some passes, then it looks a lot worse. But I think what he did with trusting his receivers, which I think is a big part of playing quarterback, what I saw him do last year, I think was a major step up. And it's something that I don't think Derek Carr has in his system. We saw plenty of games where Geno Smith like stayed within the offense, but then we saw a couple times where it's like, he's like, okay, I got to go make a play. And he was able to make the play. And I don't think Derek Carr necessarily has that I'm going to go make a play sort of thing. Like we've seen him plenty of times try, Like the play that always goes to mind to me is he was trying to make a play. It was Sunday night game against the Cowboys. It was like late in the season a couple of years ago. He's running towards the pylon. He's, reaching out for the pylon. Arm gets hit, fumbles it out the back of the end zone. It feels like, I don't know. I don't want to say that he can't, but it feels like he doesn't have that like playmaker, put the team on my back sort of gear.
Right, and I agree. I just wanted to get that out of the way just because I didn't hear you mention Geno Smith's name, so I had to do that. But going back to the question though, man. So I've been saying the Saints, since the offseason, actually since even before he got released. When it was reported that he was going to get benched, I knew right then and there, or at least I thought that, I think he's going to the Saints. Dennis Allen, his 1 year where he was a top MVP candidate, which is in 2016 before he broke his fibula in the playoffs. His head coach was Dennis Allen. So there's a history there. But then again, you got to look at the logistics. You got to look at the off the field stuff, and the Saints are salary cap hell. I think if I look correctly, negative $55 million. And so to get it,
I think they're negative $50 million already for next year's salary cap too.
And next year, oh my
they're
gosh,
already, they're not great.
Right, and Derek Carr is looking for how much? $40+ million?
Probably.
And okay, let's say the Saints were a Super Bowl contender, right, and they were a quarterback away. Then I had no problems with the Saints, gutting the roster a little bit to get a quarterback that could push them over the top. But the problem is they're not anywhere near contention. And so why would you gut the roster to add a quarterback that's more middle tier than he is top 10, than he is a star? And so now I'm starting to think the Saints don't really make a lot of sense. Because you can't gut the entire roster to add a mid-tier quarterback for mid-tier results. That just doesn't make any sense to me. And so I don't know how much he really is even over a healthy Jameis Winston at this point in his career, right? And so I'm going to have to cross out the Saints. Now, the Jets would make the most sense, but I think the Jets have more of a desire to bring in Aaron Rodgers. So I can't say the Jets. Now, this might sound counterintuitive to what we were saying earlier because we were talking about, how the Colts should go after a young guy and they should stop this revolving door of quarterbacks. But I think the most logical landing spot right now would be the Indianapolis Colts. Not only do they have a need, they have the cap space and the flexibility. Let's say the Colts get a Will Levis, right? And he's not completely ready to start year one. Or let's say they get an Anthony Richardson. And obviously, he's very raw. And so I think the thinking is going to be that in whatever team he gets drafted to, he's probably not going to start year one unless he's thrown into the fire because of an injury or whatnot. But I think the Colts could go a Derek Carr route. Frank Reich, it's been a couple of years since he's really won any meaningful games. And so maybe, he wants to scratch that itch a little bit. And I think they could, get two of the things that they desire. And that's both security at the quarterback position and a young guy at the quarterback position, all the while getting a stopgap option because you have a lot of cap space to work with because you have the capital to make it work. And so I think right now the Indianapolis Colts will probably make the most sense given that they have a veteran head coach, given that they still can, draft and develop a young quarterback, and they can still win some games now. Who says no?
I think the only not problem I have with it necessarily, I think that Derek Carr, it seems like he wants to go to a place where he's wanted. You know what I mean? Where it feels like he is like the guy. Like, hey, there's no backup plans. Like and granted, it's not like the Jets necessarily. The Jets have been very outspoken with wanting Aaron Rodgers, so maybe he'd feel like nobody wants to be anybody's backup plan. But I don't know. Indianapolis it's not a bad option. I think that especially like with how weak for the most part, although I really do like the Jags and I love Trevor Lawrence, I think that it's still a weak division. And like, I think if he goes there, I think that they're probably within the favorites. And I also think that it would be the best quarterback that they've had probably since Andrew Luck in terms of at least like Phillip Rivers, we knew probably last season. Matt Ryan, we thought like maybe you can get a year or two out of him. Right. And then with Carson Wentz, I think we all kind of were like, I don't think that's going to work. And so I think that he's coming in with like a guy like if Derek Carr, I think can easily play probably 5-6 more years, like at the level he's been playing at his whole career. So I think from that perspective, I think it would probably, their best quarterback they've had since probably Andrew Luck retired.
Wait, real quick. Do you think he'd be a Hall of Famer in Indianapolis?
Oh, I heard that. And I heard that. And honestly, I'm glad you brought that up. I heard that from the Jets. If you play here and you win, you'd be a Hall of Famer. And two things. One, if you truly feel that way, like sign him. Like, you don't even need Aaron Rodgers then. If he's going to be a
Right.
Hall of Famer, if he's there and wins with you, that. The other hand of it, I see where they're coming from because of how horrible Joe Namath's stats are. Joe Namath is a Hall of Famer, and he has one of the worst resumes I've ever seen, but he has a Super Bowl ring in New York. He
has
has
more career picks and touchdowns.
Yep. I think he's only had like 3 seasons with more touchdowns than picks. Fact he's in the I put out a nice TikTok on it a while ago. People were talking about like the most overrated Hall of Famer. I was like, wait till I drop this one. But if they think he's a Hall of Famer, then go for it. Like, if you think that that's what he can be, I mean, hey, this is now the second season he's had somebody calling him, potential Hall of Famer. Had Devontae Adams saying it last year. Have the Jets saying it this year. Speaking of Devontae Adams, I'm sure he would love to reunite with Aaron Rodgers. I'll let you go first on this one. Where do you think he ends up?
Well, I think I kind of already answered this, bro, by saying because I had the Jets as the perfect landing spot, or outside of the Saints, I guess. After I realized the Saints, aren't as realistic as people would like to think. But I think the Jets, I'm gonna just say, I think the New York Jets. I mean, they hired Nathaniel Hackett as offensive coordinator for one reason, and for one reason only, to try to lure in Aaron Rodgers, and I think it's given all indications. I mean, his time in Green Bay is up, and so. You start to think of logical landing spots. I think New York is really the only spot that fits. Vegas, yeah, they could trade maybe a combination of the 7th overall pick and then maybe a later pick in this year's draft to acquire Aaron Rodgers. But offensive line is mid tier at best. Defense, one of the worst in football. So once you bring in Aaron Rodgers and you give up all that capital to get in Aaron Rodgers, how are you going to be able to surround him with a defense that's competent enough? I mean, to me, that's kind of a lateral move. I don't think if you were sure that by bringing them in, you guys are instantly Super Bowl contenders, then okay, by all means, make that move. Then you can kind of do whatever you need to on defense with whatever you got. But I don't think it does that for them. And so I think, and unless the Cowboys are willing to swap out, Dak and maybe a pick for Aaron Rodgers, I don't think that's on the table, though. So I'm going to have to go with the Jets. I mean, again, Nathaniel Hackett, they have a head coach that, wants to win now. And obviously, he's more than competent. They have a defense that's top 10 in the league. They have weapons to work with. They have one of the game's brightest, young running backs. And this is New York that we're talking about here. And Aaron Rodgers, I know he's not, super media friendly, but, I think he does want to win. And I think going to New York would give him the best chance of doing so. Now, I'm not sure if it would vault them immediately into Super Bowl contention, but like you said earlier, they'd instantly be a playoff team. They'd instantly be maybe Miami might have something to say about this, but I think New York within Aaron Rodgers would be Buffalo's biggest competition in the AFC East. And given how, they struggled in the postseason in the last couple of years, and I don't think it's a stretch by any sort of the imagination to say that the Jets can potentially knock off, the Bills, maybe come playoff time. And so I think, I'm going to have to go with the Jets. They're desperate. They have the money. They have the capital. They have the team ready to win now, and they have the need. New York Jets.
I think it's the Raiders. As much as I would love to say the Packers, I think Aaron Rodgers, at this point in his career, I don't think he makes any of the teams that are looking to add him. I don't think he makes some Super Bowl contenders. I don't think he makes the Raiders, the Jets, the Packers. I don't think he makes any of them Super Bowl contenders. But I think with Vegas, I think you're going to see a little bit of some security there. You have Devontae Adams. You have a guy who when stuff breaks down, you can do that. And I think that a lot of the veteran talent that they have on their roster, I think is something that he looks at as a major plus, right? You're looking at Hunter Renfrow. You're looking at, I'm assuming they're probably going to re-sign Josh Jacobs. At worst, I think they're probably going to franchise tag him. I also think that they have better capital that is a little bit more valuable to the Packers, that they look at as the 7th overall pick, I think, is what the Packers are going to be looking at, as opposed to, I think, what the Jets are 17th. I think that they look at that. Granted, the Packers, the reports is that if he wants to be moved, they'll move him to where he wants to go. So if he wants to go to the Jets, then what the Raiders have on the table doesn't really matter. But I think having all those veteran guys versus with the Jets, obviously you're dealing with granted, a good first-time head coach, but a first-time head coach. You're also dealing with, you talked about Nathaniel Hackett. Nathaniel Hackett, I don't know if him being the if him being the head coach wasn't enough to get him to leave. I'm not sure if him being the offensive coordinator is enough to get Aaron Rodgers to leave purely for Hackett. But again, a lot of the young talent and Rodgers again, it doesn't seem like he for the most part of the season he didn't like throwing to Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs, guys that were drafted there that he got to spend an off season with. If you wanted to work with young guys, he would probably just stay in Green Bay. Which I think is still potentially on the table. We'll see. I didn't really think he ever really wanted to leave, but we'll see what happens as all these leaks keep coming out about the Packers not necessarily wanting him. But then you talk about the receivers, right? Elijah Moore and Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall at running back. Like I think he would rather go if he's going to have to learn with new guys. I think he'd rather just go Waller and Renfro and Josh Jacobs as opposed to some of those guys, which is why I think the Raiders are probably the best spot for him if he is to leave. And I think that at this point he is going to leave. And I don't want to say I'm rooting for him to leave, but I it's getting to be time a little bit. And I think one, spoiler, I am going to be going to the Packers game in Vegas this year. That would be a nice treat seeing Rodgers and Adams versus the Packers. I think that would be a nice kind of game where, even if the Packers lose, I can come out of that game being like, that was fun to watch. But I just think, although it doesn't give him the best chance to compete, I would agree that that's New York. And he kind of did come out and say that, like, there's no point in playing if you don't have a chance to win it all. But I think that he wants to go to a place where he's going to feel a little bit more comfortable. He's going to get an offensive guy at head coach who he's seen work with the best of all time in Tom Brady. We've seen him and Josh McDaniels. And I think that McDaniels could tailor a scheme a little bit more or closer to Rodgers. Rodgers' liking, as opposed to, we saw Nathaniel Hackett has never looked super great calling plays. He certainly didn't last year. And I think that even when he was in Green Bay, he did a lot of the red zone stuff, and the red zone offense wasn't spectacular his last 2 years in Green Bay. So I think that it wouldn't shock me if he winds up in any of these places. But I think for right now, I think Vegas winds up being that front runner just because of the familiarity with Devontae, a lot of the veteran guys, and a second head coach. Granted, not a great second-time head coach, but a second-time head coach. Any other comments?
Yeah, I think it really just comes down to what he's going to prioritize the most. Being comfortable or the best chance at winning. Because if he's with the Raiders, he's going to have to compete against Patrick Mahomes twice a year. If Russell Wilson is indeed brought back to life, twice a year, and Sean Payton, and then Justin Herbert and the Chargers, twice a year. And that's not including the rest of the AFC because the AFC is so stacked compared to the NFC. And I understand going to the Jets, you're still in the AFC, but obviously you have a lot more support, especially defensively. And at head coach, you have a head coach that's a lot more confident than the Josh McDaniels. But it really just comes down to what he prioritizes the most, because you bring up a very valid point. And I completely forgot about that. That whole, I guess, saga in Green Bay last year, first half of the season, in which, it was constant back and forths. Indirectly, of course, but between him and the young guys, calling the young guys out in the media, or maybe all that time spent with the young guys, maybe now he's willing to embrace more of a mentorship type role, and maybe he'd be willing, to lead these guys, knowing that there's more talent, despite being younger. These guys are a lot more talented in New York, and so we'll see what happens. But again, I think it comes down to what he prioritizes the most. But Emmitt, you make very valid points, and I think Vegas is actually, maybe a little bit more realistic than I had initially thought, but. I guess we'll see what happens.
And I think also with because we talk about both of those divisions, I wouldn't call them either necessarily easy. Like you take a look, obviously we talked about the Chiefs, right, and their offense, and the Chargers and their offense, and then the Broncos and their what we're hoping is with their offense. But I think defensively, outside of Denver, none of the teams are super spectacular. And I think also just taking a look at the Jets division, right? Buffalo generally pretty good on the defensive end. Miami's not super great on the defensive end, but they're bringing in a guy like Vic Fangio. I'd expect that to improve. And then you'd have to go up against Bill Belichick twice a year. And looking at their schedule, the Jets, the AFC East and AFC West play each other this year. So he wouldn't be able to. He would just get Patrick Mahomes once as opposed to twice if he was playing for the Jets. But their opponents are very ugly this year. Obviously, Bills, Dolphins, Patriots in the division. Then at home, you're getting Chiefs, Chargers, obviously, which means you're getting Broncos, Raiders on the road. But here's who you're getting. Who else you're getting at home? You're getting Philly at home. That's not great. And then you're also on the road. You're going to be getting the Browns, who I'm assuming are going to be improved with Deshaun Watson. You're getting the Cowboys on the road and the Giants on the road. Like, I think it's just a
Oh
tough.
my!
They have
Talk
a
about a
tough.
gauntlet.
They have a tough schedule for sure. And granted, I think he's going to have a tough schedule regardless because he's going to be playing against all the teams from these divisions regardless. But I think that it if you're going to be going through that gauntlet, I think you'd probably be you'd want to go through that gauntlet with somebody you're comfortable with rather than, going into it a little bit blind. But let's talk about what last thing before we go. We can make this a little bit quick. The Titans have cleared house. Just this morning, they've cut Taylor Lewan. They've cut Robert Woods. They got rid of Randy Bullock. Their kicker, they've cleared up, I think, over around $30 million in cap space, I think is what they've cleared up. I guess the question I'll ask here is with all these roster moves, do we still think they can compete in that division? I think it's going to be, they're certainly as much talent as they're not as talented today as they were yesterday. I think that it's going to be a little bit more difficult for them.
Right, and they were in the red, as far as their cap situation, which is why they felt the need to have to do all this. I think with a guy like a Mike Vrabel, a head coach, and I think this also kind of signals that Ron Tannehill is coming back because they've cut these other guys. I don't see a scenario in which they cut a Ron Tannehill unless they think that Malik Willis is ready. But because Malik Willis did cede, starting quarterback duties to Josh Dobbs, he's nowhere near ready unless he's able to put in just a miraculous offseason. But I think this signals that Ron Tannehill is here to stay, probably with either an extension or a restructured contract that lowers his cap number. I think they absolutely can, because when you have a Mike Vrabel, when you have a Derrick Henry, when you still have some of those pieces on defense, when you play in the weak division, you still want to do what you can to win as much, football as you can. And so I think if they draft well, it's not like they're cutting superstars, right? Taylor Lewan was once one of the best offensive linemen in the game, but his play has since fallen off. And Derrick Henry, he's proven that he could run behind any line, good or bad. And so Taylor Lewan, they probably have another guy that they like because I think they have a top 11 or 12 pick in the first round. They can easily replace him. Now Robert Woods, all due respect, he didn't do anything in Tennessee last year, so you're not really losing anything there. And you do expect the Traylon Burks to get better. Hopefully Ron Tannehill stays healthy. I think this is more of like they're going to retool the roster as opposed to we're clearing house because we're going to start rebuilding. No way Mike Vrabel's going for that. No way a healthy Derrick Henry is going for that. I think, again, it's more of a retooling sort of process. And, again, they play in one of the weaker divisions and one of the weakest divisions in the entire NFL. And so I think I could see them competing for the playoffs once again next season.
Yeah, I think that's the only division where like worst to first is always a real possibility. Like, I mean, we saw it this year with the Jags. They went from the first overall pick to winning the division and winning a playoff game at home. So truly anything can happen in that division. It's never been good. Like it has never once been good. Peyton Manning dog walked that division for years. It's just it's been. The AFC South is always it's always interesting to talk about for sure. Steezy, thank you for coming in. Hey, plug your stuff. Where can we find you?
Man, again, Emmitt, this is fun, bro. I love doing this with you. And for those out there that are tuned in, that will tune in at the Emmitt Sevores Show on YouTube, Instagram, all social media platforms, be sure to give my brother a holla, a follow, showing him some love. Once you decide to do that, then you go ahead and show me some love. Handle is down right here at Steezy A Smith, SteeZya SMITH. Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. I'm trying to upload daily. I'm trying to drop daily as much as I can, as often as I can. Not just Seahawks stuff, Seattle sports, NFL, NBA, all that good stuff. So if that sounds interesting, holla at it, brother, man.
And then, of course, all of his links are going to be in the description. Thank you guys for tuning in. We will see you next time.